My own father screamed at me to get out of his house. He didn't even recognize me. That was the moment my entire world fell apart. I was standing in the front yard of the home I grew up in, the house where I learned to ride my bike, where he built me a tree swing when I was 6. Now I was standing on the same gravel driveway, hands raised in disbelief, facing 2 police officers who looked at me like I was a criminal. Behind them stood my stepmother, Diana, her perfect blonde hair gleaming in the porch light, her silk robe tied neatly at the waist. She had one arm wrapped protectively around my father's shoulders, her voice trembling with fake concern. "James, please, don't let her near us again. She's not your daughter. She's been pretending." My father, James Parker, the man who used to call me his little blueprint because I followed him everywhere when he worked as an architect, stared at me like I was a stranger. His eyes were foggy, confused. He clutched the doorframe to steady himself. "Who are you?" he asked softly. "What do you want from me?" "Dad, it's me." "Emily," I said, stepping forward, my heart pounding. "Your daughter. You had breakfast with me last week. We talked about your medication, remember?" But before I could take another step, Diana pointed at me and shouted, "Officer, don't let her come closer. She's been harassing us for weeks. She's dangerous." The officers moved in instantly. I froze as one of them reached for my arm. "Ma'am, we've had multiple calls from this address. We need you to step back." "I live here," I cried. "This is my father's house. Look, I have keys, photos." I dug through my purse with shaking hands, pulling out an old Polaroid. My dad and me at the beach when I was 10, both covered in sand, smiling. I held it up desperately. "Ask him! Ask my dad! He knows me!" But when I turned to him, my father's face was pale, lost. "Please go away," he murmured. "I don't know you." The air left my lungs. It was like watching him die while still standing right there. Diana pressed her face into his shoulder, pretending to cry. "See what she's doing? She's trying to confuse him. James, she wants your bank information just like she did before." "What are you talking about?" I shouted. "I've never—" "Enough!" one of the officers interrupted. "Ma'am, you're trespassing on private property. You need to leave." I stared at him, my voice breaking. "This is my family's home." Diana tilted her head slightly, that cold smirk finally appearing. The one I'd seen before when she thought no one was watching. "Faker," she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. And in that single word, I knew everything had changed. The officer pulled my hands behind my back. The metal cuffs clicked, biting into my wrists. My father flinched, stepping back into the doorway, his confusion turning into fear. "Don't hurt her," he said softly, trembling. "Please don't hurt her." Diana stroked his arm, pretending to soothe him. "They won't, darling. They're just taking her where she belongs." As they led me toward the police car, I looked back at the window where my father stood. His eyes looked vacant, searching for something he couldn't remember, and behind him, Diana's reflection glowed faintly in the glass. She was smiling. Inside the car, I pressed my forehead against the cold window. My heart felt like it was tearing apart. The flashing red and blue lights painted everything. The house, the porch, even my childhood memories, in colors of accusation and betrayal. I whispered to myself, "He doesn't even know me anymore." The younger officer sat in the front seat, typing on his dashboard computer. I could hear his partner murmuring on the radio. "Female suspect, early 30s, claims to be daughter of the homeowner. Possible identity fraud." Identity fraud. The word sliced through me like a knife. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them about every morning I made Dad his oatmeal, how I sorted his pills, how I drove him to every neurologist appointment while Diana was too busy with charity events. But none of it mattered now. When the car pulled away, I saw Diana step out onto the driveway. Her robe fluttered slightly in the wind. She lifted one hand and waved, a small, mocking wave, then turned to guide my father back inside. That image burned into my memory like a scar. My father's hand trembling in hers, and the woman who had just destroyed my life, whispering softly to him as the door closed. The next thing I remember was the heavy clang of a cell door and the silence of the jail that night. I sat on the metal bench, hugging myself, wondering how someone could twist love into something this cruel. I had no idea yet that while I sat there, Broken and humiliated, Diana was already emptying my father's accounts, the same money he once said he'd saved for my future. But I promised myself one thing that night. I would prove who I was, no matter what it took. Before all this chaos, my life revolved around one simple truth. I loved my father more than anything. Every Saturday morning, I'd drive across town to his house with a basket of groceries, fresh flowers, and the same hope I carried every week, that today he'd remember my name. My father, James Parker, was a brilliant man, a retired architect who once designed schools, libraries, and churches across the Midwest. Growing up, I used to sit beside him while he worked on blueprints, tracing the lines with my fingers. "Every strong foundation begins with care, Em," he used to say, tapping my nose with his pencil. "You can't build anything lasting without it." But Alzheimer's is cruel. It doesn't care how strong your foundation once was. It eats through memory, through personality, through love, until all that's left are moments that flicker like dying light bulbs. When the disease first appeared, he would forget where he put his glasses or call me sweetheart instead of Emily. I'd laugh it off, pretending it was no big deal. But then, little by little, the gaps widened. He forgot my birthday, then my job. Then one morning he asked, "How did you get my number, miss?" That's when Diana came in. She'd met my father at a charity fundraiser where she'd been working as an event coordinator. She was everything he admired, polished, well-spoken, and beautiful in a magazine-perfect way. I remember the first dinner we had together. She reached across the table, smiling at me with that careful, deliberate warmth. "You're lucky, Emily. Your father is one of the kindest men I've ever met." I wanted to believe her. Truly I did. After Mom passed, Dad had been so lonely. Seeing him light up again made me hopeful. For a while, everything seemed fine, until I started noticing the changes. She moved into his house within months. His routines shifted. His old friends stopped visiting because Diana said he needed rest. I brushed it off, thinking she was just protective. But soon she started answering his phone calls, sorting his mail, even managing his medication schedule. Things I used to do. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced with his favorite lemon pie. Diana opened the door, her face tight with irritation. "Emily," she said, voice sweet but firm, "your father's resting. Maybe call before you come next time." "But it's Saturday," I replied, glancing past her shoulder. "He loves this pie. He always—" "His doctor said unexpected visitors confuse him," she interrupted, smiling thinly. "We don't want to upset him, do we?" She shut the door halfway while saying it, leaving me staring at the brass handle. That was the first time I felt that strange, cold unease in my stomach, the kind that whispers, something is wrong. Later, when I finally did get to see Dad, I noticed bruises on his arm. Not from violence, but from confusion. He'd fallen while trying to water the plants. Diana had been busy that afternoon. I told her he needed more supervision, maybe in-home nursing. She frowned. "You think I can't handle my own husband?" "That's not what I said." Her smile vanished. "You've always been jealous of what we have, haven't you?" That accusation hit me like a slap. I didn't answer. I just packed his pills back into the cabinet, my hands shaking. Over the next few months, her control grew stronger. She managed his finances, handled all his appointments, and told the neighbors I'd moved out of state. I didn't even know she'd said that until Mrs. Dalton, the neighbor across the street, pulled me aside one morning. "Emily, I thought you were gone. Diana told everyone you were taking some job in Boston." I remember laughing nervously. "Boston? No, I work 5 minutes away." That's when the pattern clicked. Isolation. She was isolating him, cutting off every person who might notice her tightening grip. But I refused to disappear. I started documenting everything: bank statements, doctor visits, notes from neighbors. I told myself it was precaution, but deep down, I knew it was fear. Fear that one day, she'd take everything, his mind, his house, his legacy, and somehow make it look legitimate. The last normal conversation I had with my father was on a sunny afternoon in his garden. He was sitting under the oak tree, sketching something in a notebook. When I sat beside him, he smiled faintly. "You look just like your mother when the light hits your face," he said. My throat tightened. "She'd be proud of you, Dad," I whispered. You built something beautiful here, he chuckled, patting my hand. You'll take care of it someday, won't you? That was the last time he sounded like himself. After that, everything changed quickly. The calls stopped, my visits were inconvenient, and the locks were suddenly different. I started getting short texts from Diana. Please respect boundaries. Your visits are distressing him. I tried to reason, to stay calm, to keep visiting. But each time, the house felt less like home and more like a fortress, a place where love had been replaced by silence and manipulation. And then came that night, the flashing police lights, the cold handcuffs, and my father's trembling voice asking, "Who are you?" I didn't know it yet, but that was the beginning of the war for my father's truth, and for the proof that I was who I said I was. The next few weeks after that arrest felt like living inside a nightmare that refused to end. The charges against me were trespassing and harassment of an elderly man. I couldn't even process the words without feeling sick. My father, the same man who used to drive me to school, who taught me how to hold a hammer and fix a chair, was now listed as the victim. The first time I walked into that courthouse for the initial hearing, I felt eyes burning into me. People whispered. I saw Diana standing near the benches, her lips pursed, pretending to be heartbroken. She wore a black dress like she was attending a funeral, and maybe, in a way, she was. The funeral of my father's memory. Her lawyer stood tall, clutching a neat stack of papers. He leaned toward the judge and said smoothly, "Your Honor, Mr. James Parker has made it very clear that the defendant is not his daughter. This woman has been pretending to gain access to his finances and private property." My attorney, Rachel Burns, whispered to me, "Stay calm. This is just the beginning." But calm felt impossible when I turned and saw my father sitting there, confused, fragile, his hands trembling slightly on the armrest. He wouldn't even look at me. When the judge asked him to confirm his relationship to me, he hesitated for a long moment before whispering, "I don't know her." That single sentence shattered me more than any prison cell could. Diana leaned closer to him, pressing her hand gently on his knee, playing the perfect wife. "It's okay, honey. You don't have to be afraid of her anymore." That's when I saw it. The flash of control in her eyes, the way she enjoyed every second of it. She wasn't just deceiving him. She was performing. After the hearing, I tried approaching the police officer who had arrested me. "You saw how confused he was," I said, voice trembling. "He's sick. He has Alzheimer's. Please, can't you see something's wrong here?" He looked at me with sympathy but shook his head. "Ma'am, that's for the court to decide." For the first time in my life, I understood what helplessness truly meant. And when I went to the house to try again, everything was different. The locks had been changed, the curtains drawn. I could see through the window that my childhood photos, the ones that lined the hallway, were gone. The wall was bare. She had erased me completely. A voice startled me from behind. "Miss, you can't be here." It was a private security guard, her guard. "I'm his daughter," I said firmly. "He's sick. I just need to talk to him." He shook his head. "I've been told otherwise. You need to leave before I call the police again." I stood there on the front lawn, numb, watching the house I grew up in become someone else's fortress. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by papers. Copies of my birth certificate, family photos, old letters Dad had written me. I spread them out like puzzle pieces, desperate to prove the truth. Rachel called and said softly, "Emily, we need medical records. If we can show he's not capable of understanding what's real and what's not, the charges will fall apart." So I went digging. I called every doctor's office, every neurologist he had seen. Some were hesitant, some didn't want to get involved, but one, Dr. Alan Monroe, his neurologist for over a year, agreed to meet me. He looked exhausted when I sat in his office. "I remember your father," he said, flipping through his files. "His decline was rapid, but he always mentioned you. You were his anchor." My throat tightened. Then how could he forget me so completely? Dr. Monroe sighed. When patients are manipulated, isolated, their memories are influenced, especially by someone they trust. If she's been controlling his environment, his medication schedule, or even what he hears about you, she could make him believe anything. That hit me like a punch to the chest. Are you saying she brainwashed him? He hesitated. Not in the movie sense, but yes, it's possible. People with Alzheimer's depend on their caretakers for reality. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on my father's face, the confusion, the fear, the absence of recognition. I thought of Diana whispering in his ear, filling every silence with lies. My heart burned with anger and grief, but beneath it all was resolve. A few days later, I received a message from the bank. My name had been removed from all joint accounts. My father's savings, the retirement fund he'd built for decades, had been transferred into an account solely under Diana's name. That was the final confirmation I needed. This wasn't just manipulation, it was theft, premeditated and cruel. I called Rachel. She's draining everything. We need to act fast. Rachel's voice was calm but sharp. Then we'll bring her into the light, Emily. But you need evidence, medical proof, financial records, and someone who can testify to your father's condition. I nodded, gripping the phone tighter. I'll get it. Every last piece. In that moment, I stopped feeling like a victim. The fear that had kept me paralyzed was replaced by something stronger. The fire of a daughter who refused to let her father be erased. Diana had stolen his mind, his trust, and his savings, but she hadn't stolen the truth, and I was going to make sure everyone saw it. I still remember the night the decision finally settled inside me, heavy, unshakable, like a storm about to break. I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by stacks of papers and evidence. My father's medical notes, old family photos, copies of his architectural designs, with his signature still firm and proud at the bottom. It was almost midnight, but my mind wouldn't rest. I kept hearing his voice, echoing in my memory, "Every strong foundation begins with care, Em." That sentence had built my entire childhood. Now it became my mission. If Diana had built a lie around my father, I was going to tear it down, brick by brick, with truth. The next morning, I met with Rachel Burns, my attorney, in her downtown office. Her desk was covered with files, sticky notes, and legal pads scribbled with dates and case references. She looked up as soon as I walked in. "Emily, I've been going through the case documents," she said, gesturing to a file labeled Parker v. Parker. "It's worse than we thought. Diana submitted power of attorney documents, all signed after your father's neurologist declared his cognitive impairment. She couldn't legally do that." I felt my chest tighten. Then how is she getting away with it? Rachel leaned back, eyes sharp. "Because she made everyone believe you're a fraud. She used his illness to rewrite his reality, but we're going to expose that. Step 1. We need Dr. Monroe's official testimony and medical records proving your father's mental state when those papers were signed." I nodded. "He'll help. He knows what's happening." Rachel gave a faint smile. "Good, because once we have that, we'll request a guardianship hearing. You'll petition the court to become your father's legal guardian and force a full audit of Diana's financial activity." Her words were like a light flicking on in a dark room. For the first time in weeks, I felt direction, purpose. That afternoon, I drove to Dr. Alan Monroe's office. He was waiting for me, a calm steadiness in his eyes. "I've reviewed your father's case again," he said, handing me a folder thick with medical forms. "The results from his cognitive tests. These will prove he wasn't capable of understanding any legal changes at that time." "Thank you," I whispered. My hands trembled as I held the folder. It felt like holding hope. He studied me for a long moment. "You remind me of him, you know, the way you don't give up." That made me smile, even through the exhaustion. He taught me that. Then he said something that stuck with me forever. "If you want to bring the truth to light, you'll need to show the court not just paperwork, but heart. Remind them who he was before she made him forget." So that night I began to build my own case, not as a lawyer, but as a daughter. I dug out home videos of my father teaching me to draw when I was 7, our family Christmas mornings, the recording from my graduation where he'd said into the camera, "That's my girl, my Emily." Each clip hurt to watch, but it also reminded me why I was fighting. I spent hours scanning photos, writing down dates, and highlighting moments that proved our bond. Birthdays, letters, texts. I even found an old voicemail where he'd said, "Em, I left the garage light on again. You'll laugh when you hear this." That voice, his real voice, would matter. It had to. Days later, we filed the petition. The courtroom was silent as Rachel stood and said, "Your Honor, my client seeks guardianship on the grounds that her father, James Parker, has been exploited by his spouse during his cognitive decline." Diana was there, sitting perfectly composed, her pearl necklace gleaming under the lights. She didn't flinch, just folded her hands neatly in her lap and smiled that same cold, practiced smile. Her lawyer rose, feigning outrage. "Your Honor, this is harassment. Mrs. Parker has cared for her husband selflessly while this woman, a stranger, has tried to interfere in their private affairs." The judge frowned. "Let's hear the evidence." Rachel began presenting the documents. Dr. Monroe's medical report dated months before the new power of attorney. Then the financial transfers, the withdrawals, the forged signature inconsistencies, each piece of paper chipped away at Diana's mask. Then Rachel played the home videos. The courtroom grew quiet as the screen showed a younger version of my father laughing beside me, handing me a pencil, saying, "Every strong foundation begins with care, Em." I saw the judge's expression soften. Even a few people in the gallery wiped tears. When the video ended, Rachel turned toward Diana and said calmly, "Does that look like a man who didn't know his daughter?" Diana's jaw tightened. For the first time, she looked uneasy. After the hearing adjourned, Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "We did well today. The judge will order a full evaluation. Medical, financial, everything." I exhaled deeply. For weeks, I had felt like I was screaming into a void, unheard and unseen. But now, the truth was finally starting to echo back. When I got home that night, I stood by my father's old drafting table, the one I'd kept in my apartment since the day she locked me out. I ran my fingers along its surface and whispered, "I'm not giving up on you, Dad. Not now. Not ever." That was the night I stopped feeling like a victim and started becoming something stronger. A daughter fighting for justice, memory, and love. And I didn't know it yet, but the real storm, the one that would expose everything, was only days away. The morning of the final hearing felt like the calm before a thunderstorm. I woke up early, unable to breathe properly, my heart pounding with equal parts fear and fury. Today, everything would either collapse or finally come crashing down on the woman who had turned my father's illness into her weapon. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy, just something my father used to call professional and kind. As I stood before the mirror, I whispered to my reflection, "For him." When I reached the courthouse, the hallway buzzed with quiet tension. Lawyers, reporters, and spectators murmured under their breath. By now, the case had caught local media attention. Stepmother accused of exploiting Alzheimer's victim, and Diana hated it. She arrived in her signature cream suit, pearl necklace shining, her expression calm and cold, the perfect portrait of innocence. But her eyes flickered with unease when she saw me holding that brown envelope. Inside it were the pieces she didn't expect me to find. The hearing began. Judge Henderson, a stern man with silver hair and a sharp gaze, presided. "Let's continue with the guardianship case of James Parker," he said firmly. "Mrs. Parker, you're accused of financial exploitation and falsifying documents. You may proceed." Diana's lawyer stood, smooth and polished as ever. "Your Honor," he began, "my client has cared for her husband day and night. These accusations are not only false but cruel. Mr. Parker himself has testified repeatedly that he does not recognize this woman." He gestured toward me like I was an intruder in my own family. Rachel stood slowly, her voice steady but charged with quiet fire. "Your Honor, We will show that Mr. Parker's testimony was coerced, manipulated, and influenced by someone who had complete control over his environment, medication, and access to information. That someone is his wife, Mrs. Diana Parker. Diana blinked, but stayed composed. She even reached for a tissue, pretending to dab her eyes. Rachel continued, "We will prove that Mrs. Parker not only isolated him, but also stole his retirement funds, liquidated his savings, and changed the locks of his home, all while portraying his only daughter as an imposter." The courtroom murmured. Diana whispered something to her lawyer, but Rachel didn't stop. To begin, we call Dr. Alan Monroe to the stand. Dr. Monroe adjusted his glasses as he spoke clearly into the microphone. "Mr. James Parker has been my patient for nearly 2 years. When Mrs. Parker presented new legal documents for him to sign, he was already in moderate cognitive decline. At that stage, he could be easily manipulated into believing things that weren't true." Rachel asked, "Doctor, in your professional opinion, could Mr. Parker have understood that his daughter was being accused of impersonation?" Dr. Monroe shook his head. "Absolutely not. In fact, during his evaluations, he mentioned his daughter repeatedly, describing her as his caregiver, his comfort. He spoke of her love, her dedication." Gasps echoed through the room. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I didn't look away. Diana's lawyer tried to recover. "Doctor, people with Alzheimer's often confuse facts. Isn't it possible he was referring to his wife?" Dr. Monroe's tone stayed calm. "Possible, yes, but not in this case. He said her name, Emily, more than a dozen times in my notes." All eyes turned to Diana. Her lips parted, but no words came out. The oracle nodded at me. "Your Honor, with permission, we'd like to present an audio recording taken from the defendant's own phone." Diana's face went pale. "Objection!" her lawyer shouted. "That's private property." "Overruled," Judge Henderson said sharply. "Proceed." Rachel pressed play. The room fell silent. Diana's voice came through, cold and dripping with cruelty. "You have to stop asking about Emily, James. She's gone. She doesn't care about you. I'm the only one who's here for you now." Then my father's faint, trembling voice replied, "But she said she'd bring me my blueprints. My little blueprint." Diana's voice hardened. "She lied, James. Forget her. You only need me." The recording ended. The silence afterward was electric. You could hear a pin drop. The judge's eyebrows furrowed deeply. Rachel let the pause stretch, then said quietly, "Your Honor, this was recorded by the home's security system, which Mrs. Parker forgot to disable after she changed the locks." Diana's composure finally cracked. "That's not fair. He was confused. I was trying to help him," she snapped, her voice rising. "He didn't even remember her. He would have given everything away to strangers." Judge Henderson's voice boomed. "Mrs. Parker, sit down." He turned toward me. "Miss Parker, do you have anything further to present?" I stood, my knees shaking. From my envelope, I pulled out one last thing, the framed drawing from my childhood. It was a sketch of me and my father holding hands in front of a house. Across the bottom, in his handwriting, were the words, "For my little blueprint." The bailiff brought my father into the courtroom then. He looked frail, thinner than I remembered, eyes distant but kind. When he saw me, he hesitated, confused, searching. I stepped closer, holding up the drawing. "Hi, Dad, it's me, Emily." He squinted, lips trembling. "My little blueprint?" Tears flooded my eyes. "Yes, Dad, I'm here." He nodded slowly. "You came back." A collective gasp spread through the courtroom. Even the judge looked shaken. Then he turned to Diana, his tone cold and furious. "Mrs. Parker, where is the money?" Her silence said it all. That single question, "Where is the money?" was the sound of justice snapping back into place. And for the first time in months, I felt my father see me, truly see me, not as a stranger, but as his daughter again. When the gavel struck that final time, the sound echoed through the courtroom like thunder rolling across a long, dry plain. It was over. For months I had lived trapped between grief and fury, accused of crimes I never committed, called a stranger by the man who raised me. And now, standing there in that courtroom, I finally watched the truth burn through the lies. Judge Henderson's voice was firm and measured. The court rules in favor of Miss Emily Parker. Effective immediately, guardianship of James Parker is transferred to his daughter. Furthermore, an investigation into Mrs. Diana Parker's financial activity is ordered. She's remanded into custody pending fraud and elder abuse charges. The room buzzed with shock. Diana froze in her seat, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, the poise and polish gone. Her lawyer whispered something, but she didn't move. The deputies stepped forward, and when they cuffed her hands, she finally spoke, not to the judge, not to her lawyer, but to me. "You ruined everything," she hissed. I looked straight at her. "No, Diana, you did." And for the first time, she didn't have a smile to hide behind. Afterward, the courtroom emptied slowly. Reporters whispered, pens scratching, flashbulbs clicking, but all the noise faded when I saw my father sitting quietly in his chair, his gaze lost somewhere far away. I walked over, my heels echoing on the marble floor, and knelt beside him. "Dad?" He looked at me for a long moment, that same uncertain pause I'd come to know too well. And then, softly, "You look tired, sweetheart." It wasn't full recognition, but it was enough to make my chest tighten. "I've been busy fighting for us," I said with a shaky smile. He frowned faintly. "Did we win?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Yes, Dad, we won." He nodded slowly. "Good girl," he murmured. "That's my blueprint." That was all I needed. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, doctor visits, and quiet recovery. Diana's assets were frozen, and while investigators traced the stolen money, I focused on getting my father settled into a proper care facility, one filled with light, gardens, and gentle nurses who spoke his name kindly. Every morning, I'd visit him with a cup of his favorite coffee and a folder of his old blueprints. Sometimes he'd study them like they were secrets from a past life. Other times, he'd just hum softly while tracing the lines with his finger. One afternoon, I asked him, "Do you remember this one?" Holding up a sketch of the first library he ever designed. He tilted his head. "I built that for people who like to read," he said. And you like to sit by the window, right?" Tears filled my eyes. "Yeah, I did," he smiled faintly. "Then it was worth it." There were still hard days when he called me the nurse, days when he forgot my name completely. But every now and then, there were moments, beautiful, fragile moments, when his eyes cleared and I saw the father I grew up with. Those moments became everything. The media moved on, the case faded from headlines, and the lawyers stopped calling. But the quiet victory remained, not the legal one, not even the financial one. The real victory was that I'd fought for him, and in doing so, I found myself again. One evening, while organizing his things, I found a letter tucked inside an old sketchbook. The handwriting was shaky, but unmistakably his. To my little blueprint. If you're reading this, I probably forgot something important, maybe even your name. But never think that means I forgot you. You are the one thing I built that lasted. I cried until the ink blurred. Months later, during one of my visits, I wheeled him into the garden behind the care home. It was spring, sunlight spilling through the trees, birds nesting in the branches. He looked peaceful, his hands resting on a blanket. "Smells like home," he murmured. "It is, Dad," I said softly. "It always will be." We sat there in silence for a while. Then he turned his head slightly toward me and whispered, "You came back." "I never left," I said. He smiled, the faintest spark of recognition lighting his face. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Alzheimer's could take his memory, his words, even his awareness, but it couldn't take what was built deeper than all that. Love. That was what remained. In the spaces between his confusion, in the moments of quiet clarity, in the heartbeat of every memory we'd ever shared. I used to think love lived in memory. I don't anymore. Now I know love lives in presence, in showing up, in fighting, in refusing to walk away even when everyone else does. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I took his hand and whispered, "You taught me that every strong foundation begins with care, and you were right." He looked at me, eyes soft and far away, and said, "Then we built something good, didn't we?" I squeezed his hand. "Yeah, Dad, we did." And as the breeze brushed through the garden, carrying the scent of spring and home, I knew this wasn't just the end of our story. It was the proof that even when memory fades, truth never does. And that was my story. A story about memory, manipulation, and the kind of love that refuses to disappear, even when the mind forgets. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to give it a like. It really helps me reach more people who love these true emotional journeys. Share this video with someone who believes in justice, in truth, or in the strength of family, because you never know who might need to hear it today. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what part hit you the hardest. Was it when the father finally recognized his daughter? Or when the judge demanded, "Where is the money?" Your thoughts mean so much. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful, real-life inspired stories like this one. Stories of betrayal, resilience, and emotional redemption that will keep you hooked till the very last second. Because here, every story reminds us of one truth. Even when people forget, love never does. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.